In this video, I'm going to quickly show you how to start making figures. So the first thing you'll need to do is decide what paper size you want to make your figure onto. I always use A4 for this, and that prevents me making a figure that's far bigger than I actually realise, or far smaller. And this allows me to use a consistent font size, such as size 12, or a consistent line thickness size. So now you have your paper size, otherwise known as your artboard size. So the next thing you want to do is start to familiarise yourself with the different tools in Adobe Illustrator. So what I'm doing here is hovering over the different tools on the left hand side here. And that's giving me the title and also the keyboard shortcut to the right of that. So all these different tools I'm hovering over are kind of the ones that I mainly use. I will talk you through those tools in detail further on in this video. A question I commonly get asked every year is what layout I use in Adobe Illustrator. I use the one called Essentials Classic. I then manipulate this so that the artboard that I am putting my figure onto covers the most of my screen. So I don't have all these different tools kind of obscuring my view and taking up precious screen space, if you like. So as I'm showing here, you can actually drag these tools so they can fit in different columns or they can fit in an individual column. I like having them in one single column because it kind of, as I said, optimizes my screen space. Okay, so let's start making a figure. So all I'm doing here is dragging in a field photo. This is actually a field photo from Namibia. And now full screening Adobe Illustrator. And I'm just starting to think about how I want to tackle this figure. So first of all, I will need to resize this photograph. So I'm holding down the Shift key and I'm dragging this photograph to the right size. By holding down Shift key, we'll keep the proportions of that photograph. So you're not dragging it to a completely different shape and vertically exaggerating, for instance. I'm then thinking that I probably want to crop this image. So I go to Crop Image, which is centered to the top of your screen there. It always comes up with this, so press OK. And then you simply just crop that image so that it's the right size for you. And press Apply. And just reposition the photograph to where you want it to be. So before you start doing anything else, you want to start thinking about how you're going to use your layers. So this is a really important point and is really crucial to you building an effective figure and making life easy for yourself. So what you want to do is ensure that each individual thing, as in each individual group of things, for instance, different lines, different objects, so on, is in layers. So for instance, in this case, I'm going to put this photograph as the basis of my figure in an individual layer. And you can name those appropriately by double clicking. Once you've given it a name, you then want to lock that layer. And that's simply done by pressing the little space beside the I symbol. And that allows you to kind of ensure that that image doesn't accidentally get moved as you progressively put additional kind of interpretations on it. And this is actually surprisingly easy to accidentally move it, a couple millimeters, and then it causes absolute chaos. So then what you want to do is add another layer in your layers. You do this by pressing the little square with a plus button, which you can find beside the little bin symbol at the bottom right of your layers window there. So another thing to know that's really important about layers is the order in which you have them will dictate the order in which they appear on your artboard. So for instance, we have photo at the bottom. So our field photo is at the back of our artboard. Anything that we put in the layer above that will therefore be in front of that photograph. So any lines we put on it. And I'll illustrate this just now. So my favourite tool for drawing any sort of line on a figure in Adobe Illustrator is the pencil tool. Keyboard shortcut for that is N. I really like this tool because it allows me to kind of dictate a really kind of sharp line, but also it kind of allows it to be curved, and it's quite a fast way to do it. So if you note here, I am putting this line in a folder or a layer called lava lines. These are lava flows I'm drawing here, so that's why I'm trying to keep organized so that I know what I'm doing. But most importantly, that layer is above the photo layer, so the original field photo that I'm showing you. So that means that that line, once I've put a color to that line, will appear above it and onto the photograph. A nice thing about the pencil tool is that if you have made any mistakes, so for instance this line here is a bit vague, it's not quite going in the right place, I'm able to draw over that, still using the pencil tool, to correct that line, which allows me to kind of manipulate it and just not spend too much time rubbing it out, starting again, whatever. It just allows me to slightly change it and move on. And I find it really helpful that I'm able to kind of trim and kind of alter my lines just in case I've done a couple mistakes. And that's a really effective way to kind of like neaten up things as you go. Okay, so now we have a line. I want to make that line have a colour. So you can do that by choosing a various different colours. So this one, the two like kind of icons at the top there that I'm looking at. So one is for lines and one is for the shape fill as well. So in this case, I'm selecting the line. So I've given it a colour and I've chosen it to be red. And in this instance, I'd like to make that line a dashed line. So you press stroke and then select dashed line. However, in this instance, those dashes are really far apart and they're fairly large. So what I'd like to do is just decrease the spacing and the size of the dashes. So you can kind of alter that so that there are different point sizes. So in this size, I've kind of made them 4 and 2 for spacing. And that's given me a nice clear dashed line. However, it's a little bit thick, so I'm going to decrease the thickness of that line. And there you go. That's all I've done to create a line. Okay, so on to the next thing. So in this case, I want to highlight a different feature. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing, again using the pencil tool. Keyboard shortcut is N for that. And I'm just tracing across this feature that I'm looking at now. So just fast forwarding through me drawing that line now, I realise shortly in a moment that I've kind of made a mistake. And the mistake I've made is that essentially there's this gap where my lines don't join. So I've actually got 2 individual lines. So this is another little trick that I'd like to show you using the pencil tool, that you can actually stitch these 2 lines together. So what you'll need to do is select them both, then select the pencil tool, and then all you need to do is just join them up by using the pencil tool. So you just draw across and then join them. And this saves me having to trace them all out again or start from scratch. It's just a simple correction. And again, that's not quite right, so I can just draw over it to kind of amend it. So the next thing I need to do is just continue drawing this shape. And once I've traced that out, I'll meet the edge of my photograph. And that edge is straight. And instead of drawing down, trying to make this line as straight as possible, what you can use is something called the pen tool. And I'm just going to select that now. So that's it there. And I can actually use that to click and then select again, another point, and draw a line between 2 points. And you can actually draw a line between many, many points. You just keep adding and adding and adding. But that gives me a nice straight line, for instance, down the edge of my photograph. So some people actually prefer to use the pen tool. For me, I find it a little bit angular. There is such a thing called a curvature tool, which is essentially the pen tool where you can draw between using a series of points, and you can make a curved line. But for me, it just takes time. So I prefer to use the pen tool just because it's quick and it's easy and you can easily correct it as you go. As I'm illustrating here. So as I'm showing here, you can kind of interchange between using the pen and pencil tool depending on what kind of line you're trying to draw, whether it's kind of curvy or it's straight. So once you have your line, you can actually change the colour of the line, and you can change the fill of the line, so the actual solid colour of the line. So in this instance, you can see I've changed the outline to yellow, but in fact I don't really want an outline at all in this example. So what you can do is to remove that outline and simply give your shape a solid colour. The only thing about this is it's really, really bright and it kind of obscures the geology behind. So a way you can get around this is basically changing the opacity of that solid polygon or that block colour there. So you can actually decrease that so you can see the geology behind it, or the kind of the texture, if you like, of the photograph. And this is a really effective way to show the reader or whoever's looking at your figure what you're trying to highlight to them. So for this example, it's a sandstone, so I've chosen an appropriate colour being yellow potentially for that. So the thing I've realised at this point is I've not really been that organised. My sandstone is in my lava kind of layer. So this is why I'm trying to highlight how important it is to be as organised as you go. Because the more you have of one thing, so maybe I'll have 10 different sandstone units across this whole picture. But if I put them all in one layer, I can change them all together and all to be all one colour or different colours or whatever. But you can do them as a group in that way. Just to illustrate this to you, I'll put in a couple hypothetical shapes. So in this instance, I'm using the eyedropper tool. I just want to highlight this to you, where I select the eyedropper tool, which is I on your keyboard shortcut, and then I can just select a different shape and it will take that shape's colour. And then I'll just throw in a couple more shapes just to illustrate this to you. So now that I have all my shapes and they are all in the same layer, I can then select that layer, and that selects all the shapes that are in that layer. And you just do that by clicking that right hand box there. And then I can essentially change the colour, and it will change all of the objects in that to be a different colour, different lines, different opacity. All of that can be changed as a group by simply having them all in the same layer. This can also be done with your font and your font size, so I would really recommend having text in its own layer as well. Okay, so back on with the figure. So now I would like to start labelling things, so I can use the text tool there. So you just want to select where you want to put your text and start typing. Once you have your text, you can then select the selection tool, the little black arrow, and move that text around to your desired location. You can also change the font and the font size of that text. So once you have your font, you can change its colour. You can also have an outline around it. You may want to make that outline quite thin, so it's not obscuring the font, making it easier to read. You may want to then put an arrow in, and I found the easiest way to do that is using the line tool and actually adding an arrowhead to that line tool. So if you can also change the thickness of that line, which is what I'm doing now. So if you go to stroke, you can add an arrowhead to that line. And you don't have to use the line tool, you can also use the pencil tool to create a line and add an arrowhead. And in this example, the arrowhead I find is a little bit large, so I'm just decreasing that size. And then you can start adding more text. If the text doesn't actually come through as the same font, just use the eyedropper tool and that will use the same font and line and colour, so on. Another thing I find quite easy to do is just copying and pasting arrows. Rather than going through the whole process of making a line and adding an arrowhead and adjusting its size, copy and paste is a super easy way to go. And that stands for a lot of kind of understanding how to make your life easier and faster using Adobe Illustrator. Copying and pasting shapes you've made or different lines and text is the best way to do that. Okay, so I'm quickly going to show you a way that you can remove a background or anything that you're not really wanting to show in that picture. If it's maybe some people or something to the side, but you don't want to crop the photo in a square way, you just want to trim the edges. So I'm going to show you how to use a clipping mask. And it starts the same as drawing a shape. You just use the pencil tool and you trace around what you want to keep, if you like. And what is on one side will be removed, so on the outside of your shape will be removed and on the inside will remain. So I'm just going to fast forward you through me drawing this line at the moment. Okay, so once you have that shape drawn, I'm now reaching the edge of the picture again, or the photograph. So I'm going to again use the pen tool just to trace around the straight edges of that. This is maybe not the best example of why you'd use a clipping mask. I have a clipping mask video you can watch separately, which shows you how I've used it in a map sense and a log sense, but I just wanted to highlight this to you, and that's how you do it. So once you've drawn your shape, you can right click on, so make sure you select both things, so both the photograph that you're wanting to trim and the line. You right click and you press make a clipping mask, and it will remove the excess shape. So essentially you're cropping the image but in a specific shape. It's very similar to in PowerPoint how you can remove background, and sometimes I actually use the PowerPoint remove background as a cheat way to do this quickly. But sometimes it's a bit it doesn't always have the crispest edge, and I don't quite like it the same way, so I quite often return back to using this. In this example, because I've made that clipping line mask, or the clipping line, I've made it in a different layer. It's actually pulled the photograph into that layer. So I'll need to reposition that photograph back into its photo layer and lock that again. And that's why everything has ended up behind the photograph. It's a quick and easy way to divert the reader's attention from something that might be distracting in the background to what you want them to focus on. And I just want to show you that. And this isn't the best example because, like I said, it's just removing the sky. And that's the whole purpose of what I'm trying to show you today. I'm not showing you how to make the most perfect figure, clearly because you would probably write a little bit more than lava and June, for example. I'm just wanting to show you how to use the tools. So I'm now making more layers. And this is something that, again, I will like to highlight because the more layers and the more organized you are, the better. Okay, so now you probably want to add in a scale. So I just make a box using the shape tool. If you hold down the shape tool, you can make various different shapes, but I've made this box and I'm drawing a scale bar. I'm changing the color and the opacity. You can do all that and add in your scale. This is just a very rough scale. Of course, you'd want to ensure you're doing the right size and scale. Okay, so what you're missing now is a north arrow. And you can either, if you go to help and search and arrowheads, they have various different arrows, but I quite like making my own arrow, and I just make a super simple arrow. In this example, you probably want to just put east and west either side as well, but I'm just roughly showing you an arrow instead. East and west because you're looking like directly on a cliff, so an arrow pointing into the sky for north probably isn't the most accurate way to show orientation, but it's a good way to show orientation on a map, for example. So now that you have that figure almost complete, you might want to maybe elaborate on a figure, for instance, have a close-up photograph. So that's all I'm going to show you now, is simply I've imported another picture into this artboard or this Adobe file. And again, just doing simple things like holding down Shift when I'm changing the size of a photograph so it doesn't distort that photograph. And then you can just start to add in different shapes or different elements to your figure. So maybe putting an outline around the additional photograph and where that actual photograph is taken from, like maybe indicate that by a box. You then might want to add a letters or numbering system to your figures that will relate to your figure caption when you're describing them. And if you notice here, I'm just copying and pasting the first box with figure caption and then adding and then pasting it again and just changing the letter. Things like that just save you time. And then just showing you maybe you want to indicate where that picture is by kind of an expansion lines. In this case, it doesn't really work because of the scale bar I have there. I could move the scale bar, but it's not my preference to. You can add an arrow, or you might want to label exactly where B is from, the photograph B, and just to indicate. It's pretty clear because of the box, so doing anything like this is just additional, but it is my preference to do so. So once you have it as you like it, you may want to add a scale to the second photograph, and I just copy and paste that and change the size. You might want to change the line length as well. So the next thing I'd like to show you is a different style of figure. And this is just simply tracing on top of the geology, very similar to what we did before. But what you can do is you can kind of do a cheat way where you do almost like a field sketch, but you sketch directly onto the photograph and you can move that sketch across, and I'll show you how to do this. So I'm just going to highlight the key geological features, such as crossbeds or whatever, and put some labels on. I'm just indicating where I might put labels on in this instance by putting X's. And then I want to copy and paste that into another layer. I then make that layer kind of, that shape a solid color, and I can start putting sorting out the order of everything so that the lines that I have previously interpreted come on top of that. And I'm showing you how you do a really simplistic field sketch digitally using a field photograph. And then you probably want to have this beside a completely uninterpreted field photograph. In this instance, I'm just copying and pasting scales. I'm putting on orientations, again using east and west because it's better because it's looking at a cliff section. And that's kind of how you make a basic kind of field photograph, or field sketch using a photograph. You probably want to put more interpretation, more labels on, and compare it to a completely plain photograph, which is what I'm showing you here. Okay, and that is how you make a basic series of figures using Adobe Illustrator with a series of different tools and principles I've shown you. Okay, so let's move on to something else. So I quickly just wanted to talk you through how I go about making a graph or a cross-section, for instance. As I'm just doing this in the same Adobe Illustrator file, I'm going to do this on another artboard. So I just draw an artboard using the Artboard tool, click on that again, double click, and make it A4. And that's simply how you can add artboards, which are essentially additional pages into your Adobe Illustrator file. So when I saved this, say if I saved it as a PDF, they would show as two separate pages. Okay, so now I have, this is a very old version of a cross section, and I'm just going to start putting axes on that. I draw these axes using the pen tool, and I just hold down shift to ensure that those lines are exactly horizontal and exactly vertical for the y-axis. So then I want to add in my zero marker, so I line across that using the line tool in this example. And because it's a cross section, I want it to be to scale. So when I print it, I know it's going to be exactly to scale. So you can actually measure that, see in the numbers to the side beside the D, that is that's in millimeters, so that is exactly 1 centimeter, that line. So I know if I printed that now, that would be 1 centimeter. So I need to adjust my scan, my cross section there, to be that size. So this is not necessarily important if you're just making a simple graph, but because this is a cross section, to me, I want it to be the right scale. So then I just shuffle the size, of course holding down shift. I'm just decreasing the size so that it is 1 centimeter equals 1 centimeter. So it's the right scale now. So now I want to start looking at the axes. I then draw a line, two lines, 1 centimeter apart, and then another line just to ensure and just double check that they are definitely 1 centimeter. You want this to be as accurate as possible. Then see, that just showed me there, it kind of gives me a guide to where the exact center of that line is. It kind of snaps to that line. So now I have a centimeter, and then you've got the halfway point indicated. But I want some more markers. So those lines need to be 1 millimeter apart, which would indicate 10 meters on my cross section. So I just measure them out, 2 lines, and then I can just essentially copy and paste that. And Adobe is smart in that it tells you the kind of distancing when you are evenly distanced apart. So that's as simple as it is. I'm just measuring out using the centimeters or millimeters in this case for distances. And then from this point, it's just a simple job of copying and pasting. So I would just copy, paste, and attach that to the next kind of 10, 100 meters, 1 centimeter if you like. And then I just keep copying and pasting, and it's kind of like a domino effect, like a snowball effect, sorry. You just keep adding and adding until you've got your desired distance. And again, if you copy and paste, you're just doubling every time. And then you've got one axis done, just copy and paste, rotate it, and add it to the next axis on the other side. And that stops you having to actually, individually draw each line, and it just takes so long. So that's, you already got your axis. You might want to start putting your numbers in. And I just find that quite easy to do, but you can just change your font size. Remember to try and keep quite organized in your layers. I've kind of neglected that a little bit in this part. So the more organized in your layers, the easier this will be in terms of text. You can change all the different texts and so on. So yeah, add the rest of your axes. Sometimes I copy and paste if I'm just being lazy, and then change one number, for instance, or 2 numbers in this. But yeah, just trying to cut corners as much as you can in terms of time, and still get the good quality figure that you want at the end of the day. So this is how I find it quite easy to do. Okay, and that is simply how you make a graph. or a cross section in this example. You might want to label your distances, maybe put that on your map. But I just simply wanted to show you how I go about quickly drawing my X and Y axis using copy and paste method. It's the quickest way I know, and it does save a lot of time compared to drawing out individual ticks. So I would like to encourage you to go and watch my Digitising Geological Maps, a lithology colours video, and boundaries video to understand how you can use layers for colours and also putting your boundaries on, which is exactly the same principles as you will use for making cross sections and potentially even graphs. They're useful videos, they highlight some basic points. And then there's also a block diagram video that I have put if you're wanting to kind of add some different kinds and different styles of diagrams to your projects. So yeah, thanks, and I hope this video helped. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.